We're ready to start our conversation this morning. Analysis of what took place. Are you satisfied? Did that debate yesterday change your decision? Do you know now who you're going to vote for? What do you think of the content, the questions, the policies? Are you clear? Good morning. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning. Great to be here. It's an exciting time in our history.
It is. I mean, yesterday was a remarkable event. What did you think of the quality of debate, Mrs. Deming?
I thought it was very, very tame. And I thought that the content was not impactful. So that what you got there was more of the same. Mm-hmm. You didn't get sufficient analysis. You didn't get people taking shots at each other. You got very much, yes, well, you know, a million gallons of water. Who cares? You know, am I having a 24?
Right.
You know, are we at this stage of our development? Should we really be discussing water and box drains?
Water and box drains, looking at local government. It was a local government campaign. Do you think that's all local government is about? We're taking a very short break. When we come back, we're going to share another clip, and then we'll analyze the quality of the contributions, the body language, looking at what was said. Stay with us. Looking at the positions presented, do you think that the parties clearly articulated what they would like to see for local government?
Well, what I can say is that I was quite impressed with the MSJ person last night, and that he articulated his points clearly, brought across the issues. He discussed the issue of what he called central-local relationship. Right. It's clearly that the ILP in the candidate there was of a poor performance.
Do you think the ILP lost a lot of points as a result of their selection of that? Because he's a relative newcomer. And I think Robin Montano did an interview after with reporters saying that he's the head of their think tank. He's relatively new and it was a new setting. But this obviously is setting the pace for what people expect. There are two schools of thought. Either you start off on a high note or you end on a high note. What did you think of it?
Well, when you look at the ILP and you look at this political leader, one would expect a certain level of charisma, a person to be actually bring across his points. But Mr. Roach last night did not do that. He didn't bring across the ILP issues clearly on the platform, and he was a very poor performance last night.
Ms. Deming, look, you are a communications expert. The messages clearly articulate. Who do you think emerged on top? Everyone has a different style. Was it really an MSJ versus PNM debate last night?
It was an MSG versus PNM debate. And in this question, Atkins was really the clear performer because he's articulate. He seems to be very confident on his feet. He seems to understand how to frame the messages. The ILP representative comes from an era of, you know, of selfishness, self-centeredness. So when you talk about we won't reveal our crime plan because they will copy it. They will copy it for the benefit of the country. What are you communicating fundamentally about the philosophy of your organization? That you're an organization, a win-lose organization, or are you a win-win organization?
Looking at the choices also, the quality of debate in the end, looking at the body language, the way it was presented, do you think, and looking at Dr. Suraj Rambachan, now I understand why the government chose him as their representative, because he was the Minister of Local Government when the proposed bill was laid in Parliament. He's now the Minister of Works and Infrastructure. But for some reason, looking at the Twitter feed, looking at the reactions on social media, people didn't really either take too much to the contribution, or is it that we've become so cynical against the government? What is the reasoning?
I think there's a credibility issue there, that people no longer believe the government because the government has performed so badly after all the promises, after all the hype, after all the things they communicated that they would be doing differently. So there's a credibility issue. So no matter who went there last night, they would have been fighting from behind. Suraj is an excellent communicator, but last night he didn't look credible. But he's the one who believes their story most. So he was the best choice.
I was going to ask you if there would have been an alternative to him.
No. Suraj was the best choice. Local government has his background. He's a good presenter, and he clearly believes his own story, believes their story. And I describe it as a story because it is a woven story. It changes.
A changing term. Mukesh, looking at what was stated last night, do you get a clear idea? Now, it's interesting. The ILP's position was not clearly articulated. The MSJ, obviously, specifically dealing with proportional representation. Various persons had different answers. Looking also at a set date for elections. Colin Imbert is an experienced politician. I expected him to be a strong contender. I think going in there, I had no surprises there. What do you think about their answers to proportional representation? Does the country really understand it?
Well, what has happened there is, interestingly, that all the candidates, from the ILP to the PNM, the government and the MSJ, I mean, they're all in support of what you call proportional representation. But I think what they were concerned about is that how it was communicated to the population. Now, there are a number of what we call variations to the proportional representation, especially how we arrive at the quota, which formula we're going to use. I think that is where the debate is on. Which of the formulas should be used and how we allocate seats. Now, that is a contention.
Conman made an interesting point. He said this is a cultural shift and people really don't understand what the relationship is now going to be, how you are going to select, because it's sort of a hybrid that we are introducing. And their issue was, he asked about the rationale, and then also I think the moderator said this was not included in your manifesto, and it obviously has now. Where did it come from? Do you think Dr. Rambachan effectively answered that question? Because a lot of times the government has been accused of not having a proper plan.
Well, see, there's a problem with the government that we are seeing currently. They see the communication. The government has been unable to actually communicate a lot of the issues. Now, Dr. Rambachan made the point that the idea of proportional representation actually emerged out by the Prime Minister and her visiting, what do you call it, in Cardiff, the Commonwealth Local Government Forum in Cardiff. That is where she basically announced the idea of local government. So it's not part of the manifesto of 2010. But the whole concept is that if it was there, is how do you communicate that idea all along?
Were you satisfied, Mr. Deming, where it erupted, obviously looking at this credibility issue that you identified? So people must look at this government and feel, I am confident that there is a clear-cut plan to run this country. And as it relates to the execution of this hybrid plan, there will be a smooth execution.
I thought that Dr. Rambachan did poorly on that response because he was not strong, and the accusation that it has just popped up was a serious accusation. And he did not use that opportunity to again, wield his story, to develop his story, so that at the end of it, you heard him answering a range of other things and not zeroing in on proportional representation. It also has to do with the way that the bill was passed in Parliament. The population remembers that. And no matter who you think was sleeping, the point is that there was not a preparation. We didn't get an impression that all the parties have been working on this. They've been looking at it. This is the option that they wish to sell. You cannot make dramatic change like that and spring it on a population.
You cannot make dramatic change and spring it on a population. Do you think, in terms of the credibility issue, now we all seem to agree that the ILP's candidate obviously was the weakest in this debate. Do you think that that debate had any impact on the voting population?
I think it will have a slight impact on the voting population, but I think the population will be looking forward to next week's debate, where the political leaders basically face each other off. That will basically depend, that will have an impact on what we call shaping the views of the voters as we come into Monday the 21st.
Now, next week will be interesting as well, because obviously we have the male-female dynamic, being a female prime minister, various debating styles. The opposition has routinely accused the prime minister of not being a debater, not actually standing up in the parliamentary chamber and kicking off a debate or defending a bill. And they have said this all the time for her debating style. What do you think they will do going into next week? Who do you, obviously everybody's a strong, Jack Warner, charismatic, Kamla Persad-Bissessar is the Prime Minister, Dr. Keith Rowley, experienced politician, David Abdullah has been in the political realm for a while.
I think their biggest challenge next week is going to get in their story in 1 minute. Because of all the speakers we've just identified there, they are long-winded. And when they're not long-winded, they're extremely aggressive. So that the discipline of using 60 seconds to tell your entire story is going to be the big challenge next week.
Did you understand local government any better last night?
Nope. Had no better understanding of local government. And, you know, Trinidad is 1 million people. This town could be run by a mayor. So what is all of this about? You know, we are just not doing what we're supposed to do. We're just incompetent.
Mukesh, you have to respond to that. You are the expert here. You are the political analyst. Mrs. Deming says that it's just incompetence, that as a layman, I even looked at it from a layman's perspective. You obviously are in the academic part of this. Do you think this debate clearly looked at the issues, and do people understand local government any better now? Do they understand this hybrid system that we want to introduce?
Well, I think the MSJ candidate basically raised the issue they call the theoretical, what they call the principle of, we call decentralization, and whether or not party, there are different modes of decentralization. We talk about deconcentration or devolution. A lot of the issues surrounding called devolution, but none of the candidates basically were concerned about devolution. They were talking about deconcentration with some level of central government control over the local government system. So they did not address the key issues. I think Mr. Amber talked about the PNM plan, but one must remember that for the period of 2002 to 2007, and even to 2010, the PNM was engaged in local government reform, and that led to what we call a postponement of the election on 4 occasions.
Now we have a comment coming in from David. David says, hello, Hema. Suraj Rambachan and the MSJ debaters were way ahead of everybody else. Imbert was inarticulate and Mr. Roach just simply didn't understand. Welcome back, Trinidad and Tobago. I'm Hema Ramkissoon, and this is the Morning Brew. We're continuing to analyze the debate that took place yesterday, looking at the ILP, the MSJ, the PNM, and the People's Partnership Government. Mukesh, looking at the debates, obviously on the 15th, the leaders will be squaring off. And it's interesting, a lot of people looking at the age, and Chester mentioned that in news brief. Atkins Vidal being the youngest person there. He also took a jab at the rest of the candidates, saying he's the only person that is going up in the local government race. So their party's obviously standing behind their candidates and the quality of candidates. Do you think that he really was the shining example last night? And how much do you think age really made a difference in his ability to translate that message?
Well, I think being the youngest candidate, but he was more articulate on the issues that were being discussed last night. The other candidates are basically senior representative of the political parties themselves. But Mr. Vidal was able to bring across that he said he has been part of the Youth Council in Trinidad and Tobago, so he has the experience there. The other candidates is quite different. I mean, if we go back to the ILP candidate, it's interesting that we were just discussing the issue of whether the party is Jack and Jack is the party. And we look at, are there any other persons in the party that can actually represent the party in this context? So I think Mr. Warner would have a lot to do over the week and the coming days to actually recover from the disaster of last night.
Mr. Warner recovering from the disaster last night. The choice of Mr. Roach, I was shocked that no other member of, I thought maybe even Robert Montano or of the other deputy political leaders would have been a better choice.
We certainly would not have wanted to hear about someone sucking somebody's socks. So that would not have been a good choice. I thought there was an excellent opportunity there for one of the female members of the party, particularly someone like Lindira, articulate, female. She would have changed the dynamic. She would have softened it, although she can be very aggressive, but she would have softened what we saw last night. What we saw last night from the ILP was real incompetence.
Looking at the age factor now, and we all made the point, Atkins, I don't know if it's because in terms of social media, the Twitter and the Facebook, the interactions would have been a younger generation, but everyone seems to have been impressed by this young man. Was he the only one able to speak the language of the masses last night?
I don't think it was speaking the language of the masses, but I think that when you looked at him, for instance, he's one of those who did not hold on to the podium. So the podium was there and he was separate. He engaged the audience. So I don't think it was an issue of age. I think it was an issue of understanding how to engage. And he was able to do that. He was able to also zero in on what his points were. And what you saw was not an attempt to snipe at people or to be sarcastic. You saw humility. And to me, that was the big issue that made a difference with him.
The big issue, humility. Dr. Rambachan, obviously, according to Mrs. Deming, was in the back defending government's position, saying what they did, what they didn't do, and why they didn't do it. Do you think he clearly defended his government? Has the People's Partnership been able to emerge from this?
Well, I think what Mr. Rambachan was actually trying to get across is what the government is able to, what had done in the past 3 years, trying to bring across that the success of the government. But we have to take it into consideration that if we take Mr. Rambachan, is the current administration in power, so he has to defend the current policy. Mr. Imbert, as PNM rep last night, will have to defend not only the PNM future policies, but his past experiences in office. Well, and then you have the ILP defending Mr. Warner as being a part of the previous administration. So you have three political parties that are represented trying to put across their point. And Mr. Vidal basically comes across as the only individual that the party is not in government and part of what they call the administrative structure. So he would come across as the only candidate that basically is articulating the points. So the others basically defending their policies.
Credibility issue obviously comes into play here. Was he the only one that can position himself as a credible alternative?
I'm not sure about that, as a credible alternative. I thought that his personal credibility was there. The party credibility is a different story because of the nature of the party, because of the age of the party, because of their maturity and so on. But so that what he showed was absolutely a credible person who understands, who's intelligent, who understands the politics, who could draw from all kinds of references all over the world. When you looked at the ILP representative, as I said earlier on, that was just a bad choice, you know, because we did not see someone. I would want to see him as a leader. You know, when I looked at Mr. Imber, you saw him as someone who's accustomed to leadership. The first thing that came out of his mouth for about 75% of his questions was, well. Now, when you start a response with, well, where are you going? I mean, you can build from that, and he built from that. But it starts on a damper. So I think what you saw last night was insufficient preparation and analysis of the method, of the channel that they were using. They took it for granted.
You know, it's interesting. I thought the same thing, because debates are, it's a science. And understanding, looking at your body language, your dress, your attire, your tone, the manner in which you confront a candidate without being aggressive and confrontational, quick whips, and humor as well. No one seemed to pull humor in at any point. And you see that in the presidential debates in the US, where there is an element of humor with the different personalities. Barack Obama constantly disarms his opponents and engages the audience with quick whip. Looking at the COP's absence from this debate. Now, Dr. Ramachandran was asked that question to look, and he said that there are a number of policies that they share and they have common ground. Do you think the COP would have made a difference to that debate? And also the environment. So we had the COP saying that they were upset that they were not included. So it didn't start off on a good footing for the partnership, really. But do you think Dr. Ramachandran was able to put that to rest?
Well, I think Dr. Ramachandran brought across the point that it's called the partnership government, which the COP is part of. The COP is contesting the election, but I think the COP wanted to be recognized as a party and not as a kind of affiliate with the partnership. I think that is their major point of contention. They want to be recognized as part in the political landscape.
The COP has to decide what it is. You can't be, for the purpose of winning a seat, part of the partnership and say, well, all right, we have an arrangement, but now there's a debate. I want you to recognize me on my own. Make a decision. Are you in the People's Partnership or are you not? If you are in the People's Partnership, then the issue of being part of the debate should not have arisen, because you are out there in this coalition. So you can't be on today you're part of the coalition and tomorrow you're not. It can't be a matter of convenience.
Can't be a matter of convenience. We have some Twitter messages. Oh gosh, Hema Ramki soon, so many hours later, and poor Mr. Root still getting cut off. Oh well. Looking at proportional representation was submitted in the constitutional consultations, but discussions were too limited on it. Moving forward, and the government, this obviously is a different kind, and it showed a lack of preparation. Was it insulting to the viewers, do you think?
Well, it was a lack of performance on the part of the government, but I think it's how you bring across the message. I think the government, as I think it was, having a problem. Mr. Ramachandran alluded to a lot of things that the government would have done in the last 3 years, but it comes down to the government machinery. How do they communicate that to the population? And that is a major problem there.
Mr. Deming, you're a communications expert. In fact, I sat in your communications class at UWI. But looking at this issue, we always say that. Everyone says it's PR and not proper communications. What have they done? So if we just say a broad statement, it's communications, what have they done so incorrectly? Because if you look at the data, the government can say that they have made strides. They can say that they have delivered on their promises. You look at the comparative analysis that the Business Guardian did, what was promised and what was delivered, almost 60% delivery rate in several ministries. Why do you think that message has been lost?
The message has been lost because of all the other things that have happened. We always blame the communications machinery and the communications people, but you know, and people laugh at this when I say it, communication is based on truth. If it's not the truth, it will eventually come out, and once people catch you lying, your credibility goes down. Think of your own personal relationships. You tell a lie and someone catches you out, and that's the end of that. You have a lot of recovering to do. This government, a lot of what they've done has not been based on truth. And those unethical and untrue issues, the issues of Rashmi and so on, all of those issues that we can rehash, those issues have not been put to rest. So they've not closed the communication loop on the big issues, so that even if a lot of positive is coming through, people are not hearing it because there's still an opening there that they look at you and they say, I'm not sure. In addition to that, this government has probably spent the largest amount of money, and I haven't done the research.
Right.
This is totally anecdotal, on communication, because their communication, their ministries are communicating, the state enterprises are communicating. You look at the newspapers, the media is doing very well, extremely well in this administration. So it's not a matter of using communication in terms of formal communication, traditional communication, social communication. That's not the issue. The issue is the message.
And if the message is based on untruths, well, that's going to, I guess, affect you. Mukesh, as we wrap this interview, proportional representation, let's look at it from a political, analytical state. Is it going to work? This hybrid system that they are talking about, will it work? Will the country be better off for it?
Well, let me just say that the amendment to the Municipal Corporation Act doesn't change the electoral process itself. The voters are not selecting the alderman. In the past, it was the political parties that selected the alderman through the council, and that has remained. What has basically changed is a process of selecting, in that what's come about now is that the votes that the parties received in the corporation, that is what is going to be
used. But
in
essence, proportional representation always is seen as a better thing for the population. But why do you think there's this level of hesitation? Why are people still so cautious about this?
I think it's a matter of the change itself. Some persons view it as it could be, the PNM has had an opposition to the whole idea of proportional representation since the publication of the Woodin Commission report. Dr. Williams has made it clear against what they call proportional representation. But when we look at it, the PNM will stand to benefit out of proportional representation in this election. Because if we clearly see that the ILP is going to split the votes with regard to the partnership, and therefore the PNM is going to emerge. In areas that the PNM had not had a level of representation in possibly the central and southern municipalities, there's a possibility that the PNM will have an increased presence in these municipalities.
Looking at who wins in the end, Ms. Deming, you have the final word. Maybe you can give some advice to all of the parties for the next debate. The leaders will be squaring off on the 15th. We're going to find out what their party position is. But what are you hoping to see? What should they do? What shouldn't they do?
Just before I do that, Hima, we always reference Dr. Eric Williams and his statement against proportional representation. But if we look objectively, the leader of the PNM continues to talk about proportional representation as a method and as something that the party would buy into. So we need to have some accuracy in how we represent some of the statements. Looking forward, I think it's going to be brilliant. I hope that they would learn from some of the issues and start to focus a little more on form. Focus on what are the elements of a debate? What am I trying to do? What is my key message in a very short time? Although you focus on it, if you don't rehearse that and practice that and understand it, we're going to have more of the same.
More of the same. Let's make the next round exciting. All of the leaders are going to square off on the 15th. The Prime Minister will defend her government. Those who hope to sit in her position will talk about their aspirations for this country.